Hello, my name is Gary Scudder, professor here in the core division at Champlain College. Today I'm excellently assisted by the excellent Mike Kelly, my friend and neighbor. And I want to talk a little bit about Othello and specifically what I do with it in 110, Concept of the Self, and what I'm doing with it differently this semester. One of my problems I've always had with the 110 is I've said this in previous core talks, that I think at times it can be kind of literature light. That if you don't pay close attention, what might happen is you end up spending 1 week on Othello, whereas the Linden neuroscience book or the Hawk psychology book or the Freeland art book you might end up using on a daily basis. Why? And this is why in the past I always made such extensive use of Anderson's Winesburg, Ohio, because I thought that the 110 had the potential to be kind of literature light. So what I'm doing this semester as an experiment is I'm really making Othello really the master text of the entire 110 class. So we're starting off with it right at the beginning. So literally the second week of the semester, we are going to go ahead and read Othello now. And the approach I'm taking with it is as much as I normally do. I'm going to the end where Othello asks everyone to force Iago to explain why the hell he did what he did. And Iago, of course, says, you know what you know. Screw you, I'm not telling you anything. And sets up a nice mystery. So in a very cheesy way, I set it up as if it's a murder mystery we're trying to solve. But then I say, in other ways, this is really a metaphor for this entire class. Just as we're going to try to figure out why Iago did what he did, we're really going to do the same thing with you. And if you want to think about a way to consider your self-portrait, you're answering the same question. Okay, you know what you know. Well, how do I know this? Now, what I'm doing this semester is different than what I've done in the past. I've actually set up 4 different Othello papers. Every one of them 5 pages long. And this is very different than how I used to do it in the past. What I'm trying to do is essentially create, I guess, a tier for research. We spend the second week just introducing the play. They've already read the play. We talked about the main characters. And we try to get them to think about why Iago did it. But we don't really give them any other conceptual tools other than their innate understanding. So they then write their first 5-page paper that's due at the end of the 3rd week. And it's just, okay, what would you say? And not just mere reflection, you're analyzing the characters based with what you walked in the door with as a college freshman. So that's your first paper. Then we slide into a series of readings from Linden, the Pumpkin book, the neuroscience book. And after talking about that for a couple of weeks, then they write another Othello paper. The second Othello paper, again 5 pages long, asks them to analyze Iago or Othello, or I guess Desdemona, but mainly Iago, using specifically the tools that Linden gives us. That is, how would a study of neuroscience help explain exactly why these characters acted this way? Is there something about brain science which might explain why Othello was so easily manipulated? Is there something about it which might explain Desdemona's actions? It might explain why Iago does what he does. Okay, so now we're 2 Othello papers in. Then we get into the psychology reading. And once we have spent about 2.5 weeks on the psychology reading, then they write a 3rd Othello paper, and this one specifically asking them to critique the characters, and again, most probably Iago, using psychology. What do some of these studies about cognitive dissonance, or gosh, even theoretically the BEM androgyny study, or internal external locus of control, how might this help us understand these characters? And then at the end of the semester, they write a 4th Othello paper, again 5 pages long, this time using Freeland's Portraits and Persons. How might her discussion of art and from the self, and as I always say, the way to think about Portraits and Persons is it's much more a philosophy book than it is an art book. You know, how did her discussions maybe help us understand these characters? So they do literally 4 distinct papers on Othello using a different lens. Now, what's the pros and cons? The con is, I think, it did cause me to break up the semester in a more fractured way. I mean, before I like to have it more structured into things like I would have said, let's talk about the concept of perception. And in the process of that, we'll do some reading from Linden, and we'll do some reading from Hawke, and we'll do some reading from Freeland. And we'll sort of introduce these different lenses. And then we'll have a section where we just talk about memory. You know, what did Hawke say about memory? What did Linden say about memory? So we're sort of focusing these in more thematically, but then bringing in the different lenses. This time it's much more, okay, you know, here's 2.5 weeks on Linden. Here's 2.5 weeks on Hawke. Here's 2.5 weeks on Freeland. So it's broken up in, I think, kind of a clumsy way. That said, the reason why I'm doing it is, you see this very clearly, especially in their final paper, where they tend to always cite the psychology studies when they're looking at their self-portrait paper, but they tend to not do a lot with Linden and not do a lot with Freeland. And I'm assuming this is because I have not given them the opportunity to do this. And by requiring them to specifically examine Iago using neuroscience, or specifically examine Iago using the Freeland book, it shows to me that they have used these lenses throughout the course of the semester, which I think in the end will make them better prepared to use these different lenses when they do their self-portrait paper. So I think in the end it's going to benefit. In the meantime, I think it's kind of clunky. And I kind of like the idea of just more themes, more interdisciplinary themes. But I think in the end this will help them study it even better. Is there anything else I need to talk about? What I set it up is, for instance, if it's the day that they're going to be handing in the Linden exploration of Iago, I just set aside the class period entirely for discussion. So you have to hand it in your paper that's uploaded in Canvas by, say, 8 o'clock on that Friday. But then we're going to spend the entire day talking about what we've learned. So that way we have the debrief. And I'm not going to spend time beforehand talking about how you might use Linden and Iago. We'll probably talk about it indirectly. But we'll have an entire day. You've just finished your papers. What did we learn and what's the takeaway? So I think this is a different approach that I've done in the past with Othello, and I'm essentially making it the master text of the entire class and using it essentially as a metaphor for what we're trying to get done. So anyway, that's what I'm doing. If you have any questions, feel free to ask me, and thank you very much.